Hi, my name is Ray Halstead. I'm here with Andrew McMillan. We're with REH CPAs. We provide bookkeeping, payroll, and tax advisory services here in the Mooresville and surrounding Charlotte area. Andrew and I are going to sit down today and talk to you about some of the issues that we've been hearing from clients. Andrew, what's one of the first things that you think we've been hearing a lot from clients about?
Yeah, so obviously it's been a very unique year that we've been under. And one of the biggest things that happened this year in regards to taxes is the PPP loans that were given. And, now we're getting into this phase where we got to figure out if this loan is going to be forgiven or not. So what can you tell us a little bit about that?
So just a little bit of background on the PPP. Earlier this year, whenever they shut everything down, Congress really wanted to help the small business owner that couldn't operate, so they came up with this thing called the Payroll Protection Program. And what the idea of it was to have the employers be able to retain their employees and pay them while businesses were being shut down. And what they did was they came out and they said, take 2.5 times your payroll costs, mortgage interest, rent, and utilities, and calculate that amount, and then we will give you a loan to cover those costs. And if you use that loan to cover those costs, then we will forgive those amounts if you use that cost within an 8-week period. So one of the biggest problems with that was the small business owners weren't open. A lot of them couldn't even operate. So once they got their PPP funds, they couldn't even spend the money in the 8-week period because, for one thing, they weren't open or their employees had been laid off. So in order to kind of help the small business owner with that, Congress came back and said, you know what, we're going to extend that from 8-week to a 24-week period. So now you have the option to either use the 8-week or the 24-week. The 24-week is probably going to be more advantageous for most folks, but you can certainly, take a look at it. If you want us to help you take a look at that to figure out which one would be more advantageous for you, we certainly can. So the way the process is going to work for the forgiveness piece is that, first of all, check with your bank to see if they're even accepting these applications yet. We're not even sure if the SBA has started processing them yet. We've heard of some banks that are starting to accept them, but I'm not even sure they're being accepted by the SBA. So definitely check with your lender. And what you're going to do is you're going to fill out, there's a form, it's a 3508. So it's a 3508 or a 3508EZ. If you can do the 3508EZ, we highly recommend that because it's a much simpler form. You're going to be able to use that 3508EZ if you're a self-employed individual or if you have no employees. And also, if you didn't reduce your wages by 25% or more, if you didn't reduce employees' hours, then you can use that 3508EZ. If you have any question on which form you qualify to use, certainly give us a call. We can take a look at that and help advise you on that as well.
Sure. Yeah, no, so that's great. So another question we seem to get asked a lot revolving around the PPP is, what business expenses can I use for my forgiveness?
So what this thing was originally intended to do was to keep your employees employed. So that way you would continue to pay them. So you're going to be able to use the PPP funds for the payroll costs, that's your gross payroll that you paid. That's commissions, hourly wages, salaries, all that gross payroll piece. And also you're going to be able to use it for employer retirement contributions, your 401k contributions. Also any of the medical expenses, health insurance premiums that you paid on employees for an employee, you're going to be able to take that deduction as well. But do keep in mind that the payroll portion has to be at least 60%. So let's say you had 100,000 PPP, then 60,000 of that had to go towards these payroll costs. Now the remaining 40%, if you have any left over, then the remaining 40% could be used for mortgage interest payments, rent payments, utility payments. Oh, and also on the employee cost portion, on the payroll portion, you also get to use it for SUTA taxes. So those are pretty much the costs that you can use for use the PPP funds for and apply for forgiveness. There are some other details in there, like what it exactly is utility, things like that. We can certainly help guide you on that as well if you need assistance.
Sure. So So let's say that I had some employees that I had to either reduce their pay or reduce their hours. Are there adjustments that I'm going to need to be aware of?
Absolutely. So now we're talking about not being able to do that EZ form. We're going to have to do the full 3508 form. So anytime you reduce your head count or you're reducing wages paid, so whenever you do that, we're going to have to do a calculation to see how much of the forgiveness is going to be reduced. If you just reduce your full-time equivalency and wage reductions, actually, if you enter into that area, it's kind of a complex area, and you're probably going to want to get with a CPA firm to help you through that portion of the form, because that's really going to affect your forgiveness amount. So you want to make sure you get that calculation correct.
So let's say that I don't qualify for forgiveness, and my loan is not fully forgiven. What happens then?
So what that will do is that if it's not forgiven, that portion is not forgiven, will actually convert into a term loan. The annual percentage rate on that loan is actually pretty good. It's 1%. And depending on when you got funded and depending on the lending institution you're with, you'll want to check with them, but it's going to be either a 2 or 5 year payback period. So pretty good terms, especially at 1%.
Okay. So, another big question we get asked is just how is all of this going to affect my taxes this year?
Good question. And that's actually one of the areas that I'm most concerned about for our small business owners. Because when this PPP program came out, it was sold to us that the loan amount would be forgiven if it was used to pay for these payroll costs and rents and things like that it would be forgiven, and also that the forgiveness would not be taxable. Because usually when you have a loan amount forgiven, there's a taxable event. Well, with this program, they actually came out on the front end and said this will not be a taxable event. And everybody thought, this is fantastic. This will really be helpful. Well, a couple months down the road, the IRS then came out and said, so if you get this PPP loan and then you use it to pay these costs, if you get forgiven for that loan, you cannot deduct those costs. So for example, let's say you get a $10,000 PPP loan, and let's say you incur $10,000 of payroll costs and you use that $10,000 to pay those payroll costs. Well, then you apply for forgiveness. You get forgiven for the debt completely, so that's awesome. But then what the IRS is saying, you can't now deduct those costs. So what it in effect does is make your PPP loan forgiveness taxable. So be very aware of that. That's what's going to be one of my biggest concerns going into the tax planning season and going into tax season for next year. So let's say you got a $100,000 PPP loan, and let's say you got 100% forgiveness on that PPP loan, and you used all 100,000 of that to pay your payroll costs, and you get the forgiveness. You are going to owe taxes on that 100,000. Right now, what I'm telling people as a rule of thumb, maybe put 25% of that away or be ready for 25% of that. And how I arrive at that, is 20% for federal, 5% for state. So just be very aware of that and set some money aside. Don't go and just spend all the money, and which is going to be one of the biggest problems, because one of the problems that I have with this legislation and how they have the taxation set up is that you are required to pay out 100% of those funds if you want forgiveness. Well, if you pay out 100% of the funds, you don't have the tax money to pay the taxes on it. You had to pay it out. Yeah. So to me, it's going to be a huge issue. It's going to be a huge issue over the coming months, and not a lot of people are thinking about that now. But to me, that's the biggest issue we're going to confront next with that payroll protection program.
Yeah, so really good information, Ray. I appreciate you going through that with us. This is definitely a unique year. We're in some uncharted territory for taxes, and sounds like this is something that's going to be on a lot of small business owners' mind as they round out the year. So all you small business owners, please feel free to give us a call. We're happy to run some numbers for you, do some tax planning for you to make sure there's no uncertainty as you end the year here regarding the PPP loan and the forgiveness piece. So again, my name's Andrew McMillan. I'm a CPA with REH CPA, and I'm here with Ray Halstead, the managing partner, and I appreciate you guys tuning in with us today.